It's finally happening. And it's about damn time, unless you've been living under a rock today, or if you happen to have some kind of life outside of wargaming, which are two equally implausible scenarios, I would say, then you've probably heard that Kings of War 3rd edition is finally hitting us in October, which is very, very exciting news for all of us Kings of War players out there. And anyone who's noticed the community dwindles a little bit in any particular game system the longer it goes, usually. So refreshing things with a brand new edition is always a nice way to spice things up and to fix any lingering issues that have been just going on through numerous, in this case, Clash of Kings books. There are certain things that you can't fix in those small little supplements. They need some bigger, more sweeping changes. And I thought I'd get a few thoughts in there on camera on the day of the announcement, just so this is going to be some grade A clickbait. It should get plenty of hits because people will be just frothing at the mouth for brand new Kings of War 3rd edition content. So a little video concept I've prepared here because I saw a comment on one of the various wargaming outlets' Facebook posts earlier. Someone was saying, I hope they make it more complicated or something along those lines because it's too simple of a game and they just don't want to play it for that reason. And I was thinking, I hope that doesn't happen. Or do I? Do I want it to be more complicated? Well, there are certainly aspects of the game that I would like to complicate, but there are also aspects of the game that I would like to simplify. So I've made a little list here of things that I would complicate and things that I would simplify, which then you can add to in the comments or branch off into your own discussion, make your own videos, or whatever you like. So on the list here, in fact, is anyone watching this yet? Let's see. Probably. No one's commented yet. I'm just going to assume that people are engrossed in this video, though. Because why wouldn't they be? This is red hot, juicy content, fresh on the day of the announcement. So let's start with something I would like to complicate in the Kings of War rule system. And that is artifacts. So, as you know, artifacts are used to upgrade units in the Kings of War game, and most things that can take upgrades, there are one or two units that can have their own unique upgrades that are obviously pointed specifically for that unit, but most units in the game have access to just a large pool of items which are a universal cost across all armies, across all unit types. And I've always thought it was a little bit strange that, for example, a troop of ghouls pays the same amount of points as a regiment of really heavy-hitting cavalry to become elite, for example. They pay the same price for that. So with certain units, it just isn't worth taking certain artifacts, or even taking artifacts at all. It's just a waste of points. There are certain other units that just have zillions of attacks, so you might as well give them a boost, like a zombie legion, for example, 40 attacks. Why not give them something to make 40 dice rolls better, rather than giving that item to something that maybe only has 10 attacks? So I would like to see a bit more complication in the points cost of artifacts. I'm not saying we need to go back to how, for example, Warhammer Fantasy was, where each army would have several pages of just unique items, and it was really difficult to keep track of, and obviously some were better than others, so there were a lot that you just didn't see because there were too many. Certain armies suit that kind of thing more. Back in Warhammer, it was really dwarves, I thought, suited the rune system that they had. We've got Steve in the chat there. Hello. And a winky face, apparently. So I don't think we need necessarily to have armies with their own unique selection of items, although maybe a small little selection. I wouldn't mind, though, there being kind of tiers on point values. I'm not saying any of these ideas I've got here are actually viable in the game. Nor should I be saying that, because I'm not on the rules committee and I'm definitely not being paid to give Mantic any ideas. So it's up to them to decide what's workable and what isn't. So I would like... the simplest way you could probably do it is if you've got an item that grants a particular effect to a unit, it costs more. The more expensive the unit is, the bigger the unit is, whether it's a troop, a regiment, or a horde, or so on, how many points it costs, what unit strength it is. You could apply any of those to an item to give it a different tier of value. I think that's one concept that should be looked at. Okay, let's look at something I want to simplify now. Terrain. So this is something that messes a lot of people about, particularly when they're new to the game. Certain pieces of terrain have different rules. Not everything is even classified as terrain in the same way. The way something like a difficult piece of terrain, like a field, works is different to how a forest or a hill works, for example. For instance, with a forest, you get certain effects from that by dipping a toe into it. You can then see through it, and people can see you through it. With a hill, you have to have the majority of your base on the hill to be considered on it, and to see over it, and to be seen over it. And I think, in general, that could use a little bit of streamlining to get everything on the same page. I don't know whether that would require rewriting the terrain system entirely, or whether there's just a really neat, concise way of fixing that. But that's something I feel should be looked at as well, because that's something that people find rather annoying, I would say. And that links on to something else I would like to see simplified, which I think is definitely on the agenda for 3rd edition, and that is heights. That comes up with terrain a lot because you have flat or height 0 terrain, and it is really bizarre that height 0 grants cover to things behind it. That just doesn't make any real sense to me. So I think that's something that they are doing, though. There's been word on the street for a long time that heights are going to be increased by 1, so flat just becomes 0. And if something is height 0, you won't get cover behind it. So that would just make perfect sense to me. So little tiny units that are currently height 0 would become height 1, and normal kind of human size or dwarves or goblins or what have you would be height 2. And I would be all for that to simplify that issue. Okay, let's look at something I want to complicate now. Flyers. They've already done this a little bit when they introduced heavy flyers, but I haven't really seen anyone taking them, so I don't know whether that little experiment has worked. Whether it would require rejigging the entire flying system, I don't know, but I don't like the fact that the vast majority of flyers are speed 10. I think that's totally unnecessary. I don't think fly should really affect your movement speed. I think that it should be something totally separate. So that would make things a bit more complicated. And the flyer and heavy flyer rule, I can see how that could be made to work. You could possibly even go further and have light flyers, regular flyers, and heavy flyers that all have different rules, or you could just detach nimble from the fly rule and just put that separately onto any units you want to classify as light flyers, for example. So I think that needs a bit more complication in there. Let's look at another thing I want to complicate now. This is a possible one. People complain about this all the time, and when you have that many voices discussing the same thing over a long period of time, it's something you should be looking at. Whether you actually decide to fix it or not is another issue, and that is double ones. I don't think they should go away. Definitely, I think the drama of almost guaranteeing that you've killed a unit, but you've still got that one dice roll where there's a slim chance that everything could go horribly wrong. I like that, but that does seem to put people off the game. Certain people just can't tolerate the fact that if you roll a double one, that unit, who are way past death, are then able to just fight you at full strength. So I'm sure this is something that the rules committee will have discussed before any talk of a new edition came around, and I think that is something that should be looked at. Whether there's something you can do to limit the effectiveness of a unit that was just rescued by a double one once it's already over its value of death, then that's something I would look at. There are simple things you can do. There are mechanics that are already used in the game. For example, halving your attacks. There's already effects that give you half attacks or double attacks and so on. So if a unit is already over its route value and that is then double wand, maybe you give it half attacks for the next round, something like that. That would make sense, and it would probably make people significantly less angry when it happens. So that's something I would complicate. By the way, I'm hoping that people are going to be commenting away either in the chat or in the comments on this, on any issues in Kings of War that you would simplify or make more complicated. The next one I've got here on the simplify side is the dominate scenario. I posted about this recently on the Kings of War Fanatics Facebook group, and I think the way that you're supposed to measure the majority of the unit is kind of annoying, and you could put this in the terrain simplification section as well, I suppose, but it's more important for this scenario, I think, because maybe there isn't an easy way of doing it with the terrain. So dominate, the way it currently works, you have to have the majority of the unit within 12 inches of the center, which is kind of annoying because it's a circle, of course, so it's not the easiest thing to measure on a unit, exactly which point becomes the majority or not. So there are ways you could simplify that. The one I suggested was that if you get the unit's center point within 12 inches of the center, then that unit is considered in the zone, but there are other ways you could make it even simpler. For example, you must have the entire unit within, let's say, 15 inches of the center. It used to be entire unit within 12, but that was just too unworkable, I think. So increase the distance and just say the whole unit has to be inside. There's no debate about that. Or make the distance smaller and say if you have any part of the unit within that distance, like it is for most of the other objectives in the game, it's usually if you have a unit within 3 inches, you only need to get the tiniest corner of their base within 3 inches to contest an objective. So why not just reduce it to a smaller number and just have a tiny piece of the unit within range? Somebody suggested leader point for that, but I wouldn't really get behind that. I still think center point is a nice option there if you don't want to change the scenario too much. So Steve in the chat is saying, double ones treat as wavered. I would disapprove of that. I think that's too harsh a penalty. And I think that would make units that can counteract the effects of wavered possibly overpowered as well. So yeah, I would say no on that, but you're on the right track, just not that strong of an effect, I would say. Okay, next, let's go for something else I want to simplify. Spells and cover, or negative modifiers to spells. There are certain spells that have -1 when there is cover or stealthy in play, for example. So I think that should be uniform across all spells, really, in an ideal world. Whether that's workable or not, I don't know, but I like the idea that all spells follow the same rules. I think it's a little bit too complicated, and obviously it's something that they've kind of shoehorned in after the fact with the certain spells that were overpowered, they felt, when attacking units that were in cover or stealthy, like your lightning bolt and your fireball. But I think you could rework the spells so that all of them have to follow the same basic rules. I think that's just common sense for the simplify column there. Let's see. Oh, Chris says leader point was my idea. Well, I'm afraid I don't like it. I much prefer center point, but there are lots of valid options there. Okay, then we've got another comment here. You are Ivan says, I like some of the rules from the historical game, especially the penalty for attacking uphill. That's something I'm sure, because it's already in the historical rules, I'm sure that's something they would be looking at when they're going into any new edition as well. Anything that's already in the system, kind of tangentially, I'm sure they're looking at. But would I like to see penalties for attacking uphill, maybe bonuses for charging downhill? You would have to, if you're doing it from the ground up, I suppose it's definitely workable with a new edition, because you would amend the points for certain units accordingly. Interesting. That's something I would have to think about, because I haven't really played the historical version, so I haven't seen how often that comes up or how many hills that it's recommended to use. But I've seen the majority of gaming tables in Kings of War tend to have 2 hills on them, in my experience. So it's not something that would be too crazy, but anytime a piece of terrain gives you a big benefit like that, then it kind of forces people to create almost mirrored tables, I would say. And whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know. Something to debate anyway. I'm sure people will be weighing in on that one. Steve says, how about a double 1 unit can only be given the halt order? again, I think that's a bit on the harsh side as well. And that would be possibly too good for something like a shooting unit. And yes, the hill idea would definitely add to the strategic side of the game. It would change which parts of the battlefield you approach and how you approach them. So it would definitely add strategy. It's just the other factors that would come into it. Okay, so I think there's one more on my list, which is on the complication side, which is list building, which is something I would look at, because in Kings of War, there are some restrictions on what you can have in your list. For example, when you buy a horde or a regiment of something, it then unlocks slots for war machines and monsters and so on. But Matt is in the chat and finds this speculation very entertaining. I'm sure you do. Pretty sure you're on the rules committee, aren't you? Interesting. Well, I hope you're taking all this on board, because there's still plenty of time until October to just rewrite all the rules based on my suggestions, as unworkable as some of them may be. I hope to see all of them in there. So, list building. There are certain lists in Kings of War that may be described as spammy, perhaps. And currently, the way that that's limited is by making units irregular so that they don't unlock other things. And is that enough? Does it punish certain armies too much? Does it punish certain armies not enough? Because why do you need to unlock things if the irregular unit is so good you can just take a lot of it? Maybe. There's options for kind of the way other game systems have done it in the past. You've got different categories of unit, and you can't have too many from one category, and you must have a certain number of X category. I don't think just applying that rule to all units in all armies as it is now would work at all, because some of the builds that are considered ultimate filth, some of them are really spammy, lots of the same unit, but others, certain armies don't really require spam. They just have one of several really powerful units. So it wouldn't just work to fix those outright. But I think that's something that can be looked at to limit the spam and to encourage more armies put onto the table in the way that the game was intended to be played. I would say the same way that they give you more unlocks for taking hordes, and they've given you higher unit strength for hordes. That encourages you to take more of the big units that the game's supposed to be built around. Something more down that path. Let's see. Chris says, I like the idea of units having 3 values for nerve: wavered, routed, and doomed. If a unit has suffered more wounds than its doomed value, it is removed with no roll required. Something like the example he gives is 9, 11, 18. So something much higher than the previous value. That is definitely something to be considered. However, the way that competitive games are played, I think that would be something that would still be quite easy to game, shall we say. I think if people who don't like random elements and they just want to minimize that as much as possible, so they take items that just give you endless rerolls and they take armies that have endless rerolls, I think they would kind of maths it out in their brain so that they would be getting everything to the doomed value, which, while that is a step in the right direction, I'm not sure it may be a step too much. I'm not sure that would be best. I'm not sure whether putting them up to the doomed value should equal immediate death. If you were thinking about adding a 3rd value, which I don't think they will, I don't think they'll change a core element of the game that much, but if they were, I don't know how I would handle that. If I was creating the rules for this game, I would not have them just be instantly killed once they hit that value, though. Perhaps a kind of a hybrid of some of the ideas we've already had. For example, if you hit that value and then you're double wand after that point, that is when you would then be unable to move or something like that. Something along those lines, I think, could possibly be worked in there. Let's see. We've got a bit of banter going on in the chat at the moment, with people asking for details on what's coming up in the new edition, and maybe people that may have the inside scoop demanding info on which armies people are playing so that they can hit them with a sizable nerf bat. Right, so that's everything I've got on my list. So if anyone else has anything that they want me to talk about, drop it in the chat right now, because otherwise I'll be ending this. It wasn't planned to be a brief video, just like a conversation starter that'll get people's minds going, get the gears of tactical and game development thinking going in their brain, and come up with some suggestions on what you would like to see changed, because I don't think Kings of War on the whole needs to be more complicated. I don't want to see a brand new magic system where you have kind of the winds of magic like you used to have in Warhammer. I think the way the magic works is pretty good already. You could change the way it works, but you don't have to make it more complicated. I don't think it has to become a mini game like it is in other systems. Mr. Steve says extra attacks for orange armies. I would totally get behind that. But how orange does the army have to be? Because if it's completely orange, that would only apply to one of my Kings of War armies. If it just does have a little bit of orange in there, then maybe it's kind of incremental. The more orange the army is, the more additional attacks you get. I would be on board with that, definitely. Let's see, anything else? So I'm hoping when this video is finished as well, there's actually going to be some comments in the permanent comments section, rather than, actually, you can't even call it the permanent comments section anymore, because they changed it so you can actually see the chat after the video now. So just the non-live comments, shall we say, which are of course inferior to live chat, because I can actually read these out during the video. They have yet to develop a kind of YouTube time travel where you can go back into the video and insert replies to other things. Unless, of course, I do that via annotations, which would be very sneaky. Okay. Anything else in there before I wrap this one up? Because I do want to see what the community thinks about this. Whether you think Kings of War is too simple or too complicated as it is. I don't think I've heard anyone say the game itself is too complicated. I've heard them say that a couple of the rules are too complicated, the way they work. It's not uniform enough. Jonathan says goblins are moving to hex bases. Well, as long as their square bases or their rectangular bases that they're on at the moment fit within the confines of the new hex, then that's all right by me. There are lots of games out there that work on a hex system, even with units, where you kind of, what game was that? Was it the old Battle Masters? Was that on hexes, where you had the square units inside the hex? Okay, definitely time to wrap this one up, I think, because we're just wildly speculating here, and there's not too much to sink our teeth into yet. The rumour mill hasn't even started churning anything. The rumour waters beneath the rumour mill haven't started turning the wheel yet, because the flow isn't strong enough at this stage. So what we need some really juicy rumours to get in there and start kind of pushing the... This is getting a bit ridiculous now. Green Stuff Games, well, hello, people. Well, I'm afraid you've joined in a teensy bit too late here, because this is about to be ended. But I think I need to get back to doing more live broadcasts, I think. Because the people obviously do demand more of it. It's been a lot of battle reports and tournament reports lately, not a lot of live content. Maybe we'll change that. I've been tweaking my background as well. I don't know if you've noticed here. And I've taken away some of the old boxes that were there and replaced them with some DVDs that are very exciting looking. If you can identify all of them and you're a fan of all of them, then I'm very proud of you. Okay, let's wrap this one up. So once we're off the air, drop in the comments anything from Kings of War you would like simplifying, anything you would like to have more complicated in 3rd edition, general thoughts on 3rd edition, and maybe some retrospective thoughts on how 2nd edition went in general, if you've got any long paragraphs to type out on that, because obviously it was a big boost from 1st edition. I may do another video on that as well, because I did play a little bit of Kings of War 1st edition, and 2nd edition was definitely a lot better in my opinion, which you can probably tell by the fact I've played about 3 zillion tournaments. And let's wrap this one up then. Okay. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description. My Facebook group, don't forget to go to the Kings of War Fanatics page as well, where I'm sure little tidbits of information on 3rd edition will be leaking out over the next few months as the committee fail to keep their information securely locked away. Just little teasers will be sneaking out there. Maybe someone will sneak in and take a picture of a blurry rules page, and it'll lead to all kinds of meltdowns because it's got something controversial in there, which then turns out to be entirely wrong. That's usually how it goes. And all that remains to be said now, I suppose, is good night out there, whatever you are.